So what was the question? Let's get back to the question. This is just clearing the ground.
If a person was not open to being affectionate with regards to physical affection and even other levels, with other members of the spiritual community, would this have an effect on the nature of their openness to their spiritual friends with regards to moral exalted matters?
I think we have to look at this word open and openness. It's a very popular one in the FWPO, isn't it? I would prefer to say that if you didn't have, let's say, an overall attitude of being willing, to express, let's say, your affection on, so to speak, the lower level, that the chances are that you wouldn't find it easy to express it on higher levels either. I think the difficulty or the reluctance will probably, run all the way through. But, what do people have to say from their own experience about this? Anything? They don't have any experience. Because, verbal expression also can be, is very, very important. And the deeper your involvement with your spiritual friends, the more important that verbal expression becomes. Perhaps as you become more and more deeply involved with your spiritual friends, verbal expression becomes more important than physical expression. Physical expression, after all, has very definite limits. But verbal expression has comparatively, hardly any limits at all. Because one can range, so widely and share so much, through, verbal means. But perhaps if you did have difficulty expressing, your affection, for instance, physically, you might well have difficulty expressing it verbally, and therefore difficulty expressing yourself to your spiritual friend verbally in a general way. But you just have to consult your own experience and just find out whether that is in fact the case. And considering that it's a matter that that does relate directly to one's own experience, people seem to have remarkably little to say about it.
Sort of thinking on the level of manners, in the same way as you can shovel food in, or you can be a bit more mindful. I wonder if there's not sort of parallels with the expression of physical affection.
Oh, I'm sure. Maybe some people, they just come and slap you on the back, in a way that almost knocks you over, or knocks the breath, out of your body. Whereas somebody else may just give you a very gentle touch, or perhaps they mean more or less the same sort of thing. In each case, it's an expression of affection. But in the one case, one feels that the affection is perhaps rather rough, rather coarse even. Whereas in the other case, it's rather more refined. One has to take perhaps that into consideration. You aren't necessarily expressing more affection because you express it in a grosser way, so to speak. There can be more subtle and refined methods depending on the sort of person you are, your own degree of subtlety and refinement. But this is not a sort of, let's say, a let-up for anybody. Your expression of your affection, shouldn't be so refined, so subtle that nobody ever sees it. That can come later. Anyway, have we dealt with those two questions?
Yes, thank you. I need something to go on.
The continued remark that I wanted to make, Marcus, is that I've got the impression that the ability to express feelings is not always developed in the same way as the feelings are developed. So if somebody who can express his feelings very, very well, doesn't mean that he has highly developed feelings as compared to a person who doesn't express himself.
This is true. I mean, some people can be very glib. Some people have got better command of language than others. But I think usually one can tell the difference. I mean, someone may be relatively inarticulate, but what they do say can nevertheless convey very definite affection. And somebody else can give you all sorts of verbal assurances, but you can feel that there's not really very much behind it. You can usually tell the difference if you're at all experienced. And when you're very young, you may fall for that sort of thing, but as you get older, you learn to detect the difference. And sometimes you learn to detect affection under apparent roughness, and sometimes you learn to detect coldness even, underneath what seem to be expressions of affection.